My name is Julian Mendoza. I am 36 years old, and I am sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed, in a room that is not mine, remembering the day I lost more than money. I lost faith in my best friend. The room smells of damp and old clothes. Barely enough room for the inflatable mattress, a broken suitcase, and a light blue plastic lunchbox where I keep my last savings. Outside, behind the crooked window shutter, I can hear the train passing in the distance. That metallic noise that reminds me that I am in some city in Texas, far from where I was born, and even further from where my heart lives. The yellowish ceiling lamp flickers when it rains. It's cold, though not cold enough to see my breath, but cold enough to make me miss the warmth of home. I hug my knees, and only the hum of the mini fridge breaks the silence between the anxious heartbeats that race through my chest. The smell here combines several stories: sweat, cheap disinfectant, and from time to time, the smoke from the neighbor's cigarette. It's not home. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine my mother taking sweet bread out of the oven, the house in Puebla filling with that smell of a safe childhood. But then I take a deep breath and come back here. With my friend Luis missing, my first paycheck gone behind his promise, and loneliness rolling around in my stomach like I haven't eaten in 2 days. Luis, my compadre, my soul brother, the one who invited me to the American dream. He brought me here, promised to help me, and as soon as I got my first paycheck, he took everything and disappeared. Not just my money, but also my trust and pieces of my faith. I recognize myself in the foggy mirror of the shared bathroom, the deep, dark circles under my eyes, the exhaustion rotting me from the inside. I ask myself over and over again, how did I get here? Outside, someone is shouting in English, but I don't understand. The neighbor's television blares cartoon voices. Locked in this tiny room, I relive in my mind my son's last laugh before I left, my wife's last hug. I caress the ring hanging around my neck and let the murmur of the rain take me back, little by little, to the days when I never imagined that anyone could betray me like this. Puebla was always my home, with its cobblestone streets, the smell of wet earth after the rain, and the permanent scent of freshly baked bread mixed with coffee. On the corner, bougainvillea brushes against the roofs of colorful houses, and the voices of neighbors fill the air with advice, scolding, and gossip that travel from window to window like birds. I lived in a small house with whitewashed walls and windows always open to let in the midday light. My dad was a dark-skinned man with big hands, full of wrinkles that told stories and sincere smiles that lit up the courtyard. When he laughed, the walls vibrated with his joy. He was a blacksmith, and the whole block knew his hammering from early in the morning until the sun went down. My mom was petite but strong as an oak tree. She had a soft voice when she was calm, and a booming voice when she lost her patience. I remember her blue apron, always stained with dough or sauce, and her small but powerful hands that could make perfect tortillas with her eyes closed. Her favorite saying was, "Life takes turns, son, and you have to learn to fall on your feet." I have younger siblings, Sophia and Diego. Sophia always ran after me, her hair in a messy bun and her easy laughter filling the house with music. Diego was born when I was already a big boy. I carried him in my arms and rocked him to sleep while singing the same songs my mom sang to me during my feverish nights. We played soccer in the street with a worn-out ball, or we would make games with crushed cans if there was no ball. Mealtimes were noisy. Steaming black beans, rice with carrots, freshly made tortillas that filled the house with warmth and familiar smells. On birthdays, my mother would make homemade mole that took 2 days to prepare, and the yard would fill with laughter, band music, and cousins arriving from all over. I got sick with measles when I was 7. A burning fever, cold sweat that soaked the sheets. My mother took care of me day and night, wetting my forehead with damp cloths, telling me stories so I wouldn't feel the chills that shook me like tremors. She said that every illness made you a little stronger and a lot more grateful for life. I learned early on to help around the house, making the bed before breakfast, sweeping the yard where the chickens played, accompanying my dad to the market early on Saturdays when the vegetables were fresh and the prices were low. Every Sunday he took us to church, and on the way back he bought us sweet bread that we ate in the square watching the old folks play dominoes. High school was 10 minutes away by bike, along streets I knew by heart. Miss Elvira, my math teacher, was the terror of the distracted. A hoarse voice, a hawk-like gaze, and a ruler she used to hit the blackboard when someone wasn't paying attention. I was studious, but distracted. So sometimes she scolded me for talking in class or looking out the window. My friends were Rafa, who always had new jokes, Tonio, who played guitar during recess, and Luis, the same Luis who betrayed me years later. Back then, he was my soul brother. We shared everything: homework, secrets, dreams of being rich and famous. The classroom smelled of teenage sweat and wet chalk, and the sun streamed through the high windows, warming the old wooden desks scratched with the initials of past generations. Recess was pure noise. The shouts of boys playing soccer, affectionate shoves. The whistle of the lady at the little store when she sold the hot cakes that saved us from hunger. That's where I met my first love. Marisol, with hair as black as silk, pomegranate-colored lips, and eyes that made me lose track of the lesson. With trembling hands, I gave her a red and yellow thread bracelet on her birthday, and it was the first time I felt butterflies fluttering in my stomach. Our first kiss was under the big tree in the courtyard, with the ground damp from the morning rain and our hearts exploding with excitement. But Marisol moved to another city when her dad got a job. I learned then that life is constant change, that nothing is certain, and that first love hurts when it goes away. But it also teaches you that your heart can beat for someone else. My first job was as an assistant in Don Ernesto's general store, an elderly man with a white mustache and infinite patience. I lifted boxes of soft drinks, swept the premises, and wrote down bills in a worn notebook. Don Ernesto was tough when he had to be, but always fair. One day, I broke a bottle of oil while running around, and instead of scolding me, he taught me how to clean without wasting anything and to learn with your hands so your head doesn't forget. I dreamed of becoming a mechanical engineer, fixing big machines and earning enough money to buy my mom a nice house. But I knew that my family couldn't afford college, that my dreams would have to wait or find another path. Sometimes, at night, I would climb up to the roof to look at the starry sky and wonder who I would be in this big world. I got married at 23 to Paola, a girl with a sweet smile and a strong character whom I met at a neighborhood party. The wedding was simple, but full of love, in the white church across from the park where we had walked during our courtship. She was dressed in white with fresh flowers in her hair. I was nervous, wearing a suit I had bought on credit and shoes that pinched my feet but made me feel important. The whole family was there. My parents crying with emotion, my siblings shouting cheers, my uncles and aunts dressed in their Sunday best, and the women giving their opinions on everything. My father hugged me tightly after the ceremony, as if he knew that something was going to change forever in our lives. Paola and I rented a small apartment, 2 rooms that were warmed by the morning sun, a kitchen with a plastic table and chairs that squeaked every time someone moved. The walls always smelled like whatever we had cooked: beans, rice, chicken when we had extra money. It was small, but it was ours, the first home we built together. Our children arrived soon, like gifts from heaven. Emiliano first, a restless boy with big eyes. Then Fatima, quiet and observant like her mother. The pregnancies were hard, little money, a lot of worry, doctor's appointments that were paid for with sacrifices. But Paola always kept her spirits up, singing while she washed diapers and telling made-up stories to put the children to sleep. The early mornings were spent sleepless. Warm milk to calm the crying, diapers changed in the dark so as not to wake the sleeping, whispered prayers that they would not get sick and would grow up healthy and strong. The daily routine became sacred, getting up just before 5, showering with cold water to wake up completely, eating stale bread with black coffee for breakfast, and going out to wait for the bus that took me to the workshop. I worked as a mechanic in a place where the smell of grease and metal still clings to my hands today. In the afternoons, when I had energy, I played with the children in the yard, helped Emiliano with his elementary school homework, and read stories I made up about brave princesses and good dragons to Fatima. Financial difficulties came like an unexpected storm when the workshop where I worked closed due to a lack of customers. Overnight, we were left with no steady income, bills to pay, and children to feed. Debts piled up like dark clouds, 15,000 pesos in overdue bills, 2 family loans I couldn't pay, rent that was falling behind month after month. One night, with the lights out and the children sleeping on the sofa because we couldn't afford gas, Paola and I sat at the kitchen table to talk honestly about our future. Her eyes shone in the darkness, filled with tears she didn't want to shed in front of the children. "Something has to change, Julian," she said in a broken voice. "The children can't go hungry while we look for jobs that don't exist." She was right, and a decision formed in my chest that would change our lives forever. Luis, my lifelong friend, showed up just when I needed him most, like a guardian angel sent from heaven. He had been in the United States for 2 years, and the few times we spoke on the phone, his stories sounded like tales from another world. Abundant work, dollar wages, opportunities for anyone willing to work hard. During a late-night call when the children were asleep and Paola was washing the dishes in cold water, Luis spoke to me with that sincere voice I had known since childhood. "Brother, come over here. I'll get you a job you won't want for anything. Word of honor, I'll help you with everything you need." His words sounded like heavenly music in the midst of our despair. He told me about the construction site where he worked, about the dollars you could earn in a week, about the better life we could give our children. "In 1 year together, you'll earn what you can't earn here in 10, he told me, and I felt hope reborn in my chest. I spent entire nights mulling over the idea. Did I deserve to leave my family behind? What if something went wrong along the way? What if I couldn't find a job? What if... The questions tortured me, but the reality was clear. We needed money, and in Mexico, there was none to be found. Paola supported me, even though she cried a lot when I told her my plan. "Do it for us," she said one night, hugging me tightly. "But promise me you won't forget who you are, where you come from, that you have a family waiting for you." Her words still echo in my soul like bells. My parents were divided. My mom prayed every night that I wouldn't leave, lit candles to the Virgin Mary, and told me she had a bad feeling about it. My dad, more practical, just patted me on the shoulder and said, "A man has to search, son. Don't lose your way. But look for what you came here to find." That night, I cried alone for the first time in years, knowing that the decision had been made. The moment I had feared so much had arrived, preparing for the journey that would change our lives forever. The house was filled with nervous activity, like when a storm is approaching and everyone rushes to bring in the laundry from the clothesline. But this storm was different. It brought separation and uncertainty. Finding a coyote wasn't easy. Luis introduced me on the phone to a man named El Chino, a guy with a hoarse voice and experience in border crossings who promised to get me across safely for $4,000. "It's expensive but safe," Luis told me. "Better to pay well than take a chance with charlatans." I spent entire nights writing and erasing numbers in my notebook, calculating whether that was the right price to pay for hope. To raise the money, I had to sell everything I owned. The motorcycle my grandfather left me when he died, the tools I had accumulated over years of work, even the set of pots Paula gave me when the children were born. Every item I put up for sale was a sacrifice, a small wound in my soul that added to all the others. I borrowed from my uncles, from neighbors who trusted me, from co-workers who had been through similar situations. I had to say words of supplication that I never imagined I would have to utter. "Please help me. I'll pay you back with interest. Trust me one more time." Some helped me with love, others with doubts. "What if you don't come back?" they asked me with eyes full of fear. "What if something happens to you on the way?" I could only reply, I'll come back safe and with money." But my voice broke because I had those same doubts. Paula packed my clothes with trembling hands, folding each shirt as if it were a treasure, putting pieces of our life together into my suitcase. "Take this," she said, handing me a crumpled photo of the children, "so you never forget that you have a family that loves you and is waiting for you." During those days, the knowing looks between her and the children made me understand that I wasn't the only one leaving, but that a part of all of us was staying behind, waiting, suffering, resisting. The last week was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Laughter mingled with heavy silences, words of encouragement with tears that appeared out of nowhere. Emiliano, who was already 8 years old, understood that his dad was going away, but he didn't understand why. "Can't you work here?" he asked me with that childish logic that hurts because it's so simple and so true. Fatima, who was younger, only knew that there was sadness in the air. She clung to me more, followed me around the house, fell asleep in my arms, as if she sensed that something was going to change. Her little eyes looked at me with the total trust that children have, and I wondered if I deserved that blind faith. I remember that last family breakfast, where the smell of coffee seemed more intense, as if it wanted to remain etched in my memory forever. The hot tortillas, the refried beans, the sweet taste of the bread I dipped in my coffee. Everything tasted like goodbye, even though no one said the word. Early on the last day, the coldness of uncertainty crept into every bone in my body. I hadn't slept all night, just stared at the ceiling, listening to Paula breathing beside me, memorizing the sound of my children sleeping in the next room. Every minute with the children became a precious gift. I hugged them tighter than ever, breathed in the scent of their freshly washed hair, listened to their morning laughter as if it were music I needed to record in my heart. Every caress was an unspoken goodbye. Every "I love you," a promise to return. Paola hugged me at the door, her eyes two oceans where I sank without a trace. We didn't say much because words were useless. We just stood there, holding each other tight, feeling each other's heartbeats, recording that moment for the lonely nights ahead. "Take care of yourself," she whispered in my ear. "And don't forget to call whenever you can." "I'll be back soon," I promised her, even though I didn't know if it was true or just a lie I needed to tell myself so I could leave. On the bus to the border, as the familiar landscape faded away through the window, I clung to a silent promise I made to myself. I would return home, even if the road was long and full of shadows. The other passengers also had that look of someone leaving everything behind. Silent men, women with children, entire families seeking better luck on the other side. The trip took 12 hours. 12 hours to think, to doubt, to regret, and to make up my mind again. In my backpack, I carried a photo of my children, a shirt that smelled like Paola, and the rosary my mother had hung around my neck before I got on the bus. "May the Virgin watch over you, son," she had said with tears in her eyes. During the trip, I called Luis to confirm that everything was ready on the other side. "Don't worry, brother," he said with his usual confidence. "I've got everything arranged. As soon as you arrive, I'll take you to see where you'll be working." His words gave me confidence, but they also made me feel a strange anxiety that I couldn't explain. The crossing was more difficult and terrifying than I could ever have imagined. It was nighttime. The air was cold and dry, filled with the smell of the desert and the fear of those of us walking in silence. El Chino had gathered 15 of us in a safe house in Tijuana, where we waited for 3 days, eating little and sleeping even less. "Here we must be quiet, quick, and trust the guide," El Chino told us in a serious voice, "because one mistake could be your last." His words did not reassure anyone, but we all knew there was no turning back. On the night of the crossing, we walked for hours along paths that only the guide knew. The wind carried the dry smell of the desert, and my feet felt every rock as if they were knives. I carried a bottle of water that quickly ran out and a granola bar that tasted like cardboard. Fear gripped me inside, but so did a strange hope. With every step I took, I left behind a piece of my former life and moved closer to the possibility of changing our future. There were people of all ages in our group. Young men like me, older men who no longer had jobs in their villages, even a woman with her teenage son who were fleeing violence. We all had the same faces of fear and determination. We had all left everything behind for the promise of something better. As we crossed the invisible line separating the two countries, the land on the other side tasted the same, but felt different. It was a land of freedom mixed with insecurity, a land of opportunity mixed with unknown dangers. The distant lights of an American city flickered in the distance like a beacon, while my heart beat a mile a minute. The first days in the United States were a constant battle to find a place to sleep, something to eat, and, above all, to avoid problems with immigration that could send me back. El Chino took us to a house in Los Angeles where other newly arrived immigrants lived. A crowded place that smelled of food, sweat, and broken hopes. I slept on the floor of a living room with 5 other men, learning to live with the constant sound of traffic, police sirens, shouts in English I didn't understand, and the cries of children in neighboring apartments. The first shopping trip was a culture shock that left me confused and overwhelmed. The first time I walked into a supermarket, the smell of packaged and frozen products hit me. Everything was in English, the prices were incomprehensible, I didn't know what to buy or what was most necessary. I ended up buying white bread that tasted like sponge and ham that looked like plastic. Luis had promised to meet me at that house. But when I arrived, they told me he had gone out and would be back soon. Soon turned into days, and the days turned into a week of anxiety and unanswered questions. During those first days, I learned my first words in English out of necessity. Water, food, bathroom, work, help. Each new word was a small victory in a world that communicated in a language that sounded like noise to my ears. Looking for work in that unfamiliar country was like looking for a needle in a haystack with no light in sight. I had no papers. I didn't speak English. I didn't know the rules. I didn't even know where to start. I handed out improvised applications on every corner, in stores, restaurants, and construction sites. But the doors were closed to me one after another with the same phrase. No hire illegals. The language was an insurmountable wall. The lack of documents was another, and my growing desperation became the biggest obstacle. Every no I received made me feel smaller, more lost, more dependent on the help Luis had promised. When Luis finally showed up after a week of absence, he arrived with smiles and explanations that sounded convincing. "Sorry, brother. I've been sorting everything out so you can start work," he said, hugging me as if nothing had happened. "I've got contacts at a construction site. You start tomorrow." His confidence reassured me, but something in his eyes had changed. He wasn't the same Luis I had known since childhood. There was something more calculating, colder in his words. But I needed to believe in him. I needed his promises to be true. The construction work was hard but honest. I carried materials under the California sun, mixed cement until my hands bled, and learned to use tools that weighed more than I did. My co-workers were Mexicans like me, Guatemalans, Salvadorans, all with similar stories of families left behind and dreams of a better life. The foreman was a Mexican-American who spoke perfect English and Spanish with a pocho accent. He paid me $100 a day, which seemed like a fortune compared to what I earned in Puebla. "You work hard, kid," he would say, "and there's always work here for those who aren't afraid of it." During those first few weeks, Luis would come visit me at work, bring me food, ask me how I was doing. He seemed like the brother I'd always had, concerned about my well-being, interested in making sure everything went well. "As soon as you get paid," he would tell me, "I'll help you send money to your family and save for your expenses." The day I received my first paycheck, $600 for a week's work, was one of the happiest days of my life. It was more money than I had seen in years. I called Paula, crying with emotion, to tell her that everything was going well, that I would soon be sending her money, that the sacrifice was worth it. Luis offered to help me with the money, as he had promised from the beginning. "Give me everything," he said with that smile I had known all my life. "I'll divide it up. Some to send to your family, some for your expenses, and some to save. That way, you won't have to worry about anything." I gave him the entire $600, trusting him as I always had. "Tomorrow we'll go to the bank and send $300 to Paula," he promised me. "We'll keep the other $300 so you'll have something to live on until the next payment arrives." But tomorrow never came. Luis disappeared that same night like smoke in the wind, taking my money, my hopes, and my faith in friendship with him. His phone was busy, his messages went unanswered, and his promises became empty echoes in my memory. I spent days looking for him in the places where we used to meet, asking mutual acquaintances who just shrugged their shoulders. "Luis left," people told me. "No one knows where." Some looked at me with pity, others with the resignation of those who have seen this story repeat itself many times. The betrayal hurt more than hunger, more than exhaustion, more than loneliness. It wasn't just the lost money. It was the broken trust, the destroyed friendship, the shattered naivety of believing that childhood brotherhood would withstand the temptations of easy money. I was left alone, completely alone, with the first paycheck I never saw, with the betrayal that hurt like an open wound. No money to send home, no savings to survive on, no support that I had taken for granted. That night, lying on the borrowed mattress, I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried for my naivety, for my family who was waiting for money that wasn't going to arrive, for Luis, who had killed something beautiful that we had had since childhood. I learned that night that not all friends are brothers, that distance and money can change people, that in this country, the weakest always lose, and the most innocent pay the highest price. With no money, no support, and no safe place to live, I had to start all over again, with an even heavier weight on my heart and a bitter lesson engraved on my soul. Trust, once broken, turns to dust that the wind carries away forever. After Luis's betrayal, every day began as a battle for survival. I would get up before dawn in a room shared with 4 other men, the only luxury a high window with bars that let in thin rays of yellowish light. The walls were stained with damp, and the smell of unwashed clothes was my constant companion. Silently, so as not to wake my roommates, I prepared my survival breakfast. A piece of stale bread bought at the corner store with instant coffee that I made with cold water because there was no stove. The cold in my mouth and the bitter taste reminded me of the mornings in Puebla, but without the warmth of my family, without the freshly made tortillas, without Paula's words of affection. On my way to work, I struggled with my rudimentary English and the constant fear of not being understood. "Me no speak English very well," was my most used phrase, said with embarrassment, but with the hope of finding understanding. Americans looked at me impatiently when I didn't understand their instructions, and I felt as if I were invisible. In construction, work became my salvation and my punishment at the same time. My hands hurt from lifting bricks that weighed like stones, my back burned from carrying materials, and the sun burned me until I was left with blisters that turned into scars. My co-workers were a mixed bunch. Some Hispanics who understood my situation, others Anglo-Saxons who looked at me with the harshness of hard work and distrust of illegal immigrants. I learned to communicate with gestures, forced smiles, and the universal language of hard work. Carlos, a Guatemalan, who had been in the United States for 5 years, became my unofficial mentor. "Here you have to be strong, brother," he would tell me during breaks, "because no one is going to give you anything. If you complain, you lose your job. If you don't work fast, they fire you. If you don't understand English, you're screwed." Roberto, a 40-year-old Salvadoran who had lost his family in the Civil War, taught me tricks for survival. Where to buy cheap food, how to avoid the immigration police, what to say if you get stopped by the police. "In this country," he told me bitterly, "we are working ghosts. We exist only when they need hands, and we disappear when there are problems." The lonely nights. The nights were for calling home, for hearing Paula's voice, which sometimes broke on the other end of the line. "How was your day?" she always asked. And I lied. "Fine, my love. Everything's getting better." I never told her about Luis's betrayal. I didn't tell her I was alone. I didn't explain that every day was a struggle not to sink. "The kids are asking when you're coming back," she would say. And I would hear Emiliano and Fatima's voices in the background, playing, living, growing up without me. Guilt gnawed at my chest for not being there for their birthdays, for their first new words, for their problems at school. "Did you send money yet?" was the question I dreaded most. During the first few weeks after the betrayal, I had nothing to send. "Not yet, my love. This week for sure," I lied. Hung up the phone and sat on the bed feeling like the worst husband and father in the world. Little by little, I learned the unwritten rules of survival in the United States without papers. I learned to walk with my head down so as not to attract attention, to avoid certain streets where immigration patrols were on the lookout, to always have an escape plan when I was working. I learned basic English out of sheer necessity. More work. How much? Zrania, I need a job. Thank you, sir. Each new word was a small victory in my battle to communicate, to be more than just a pair of working hands. I learned to live with less than I ever thought possible. 1 meal a day, used clothes bought at flea markets, homemade medicine when I got sick because I couldn't afford a doctor. Keeping up the lies became an additional job that wore me down emotionally. Every phone call home required mental preparation. What I was going to say, how I was going to sound convincing, what stories to make up so Paula wouldn't worry. "How's your apartment?" she would ask, and I would describe a place that didn't exist. "It's nice, my love. It has big windows and a kitchen where I can cook Mexican food." "Are you eating well?" she would insist, and I would reply, "Yes, I've even gained a little weight," while my stomach growled with hunger. The lies piled up like debts I knew I would have to pay someday. But at that moment, lying seemed easier than explaining the truth. That I was alone, betrayed, struggling to survive in a country that didn't want me. Sitting on my bed every night, I thought about Luis and his betrayal. But instead of giving up, I decided to use that pain as fuel. If he had decided to destroy our friendship for money, I was going to use that experience to make myself stronger, more careful, more determined to get ahead on my own. As the months passed, I began to find my rhythm in this strange country. I stopped waiting for outside help and started building my own survival network. I met other immigrants who, like me, had been betrayed or abandoned. And together, we formed a makeshift family of displaced people. Miguel, a man from Oaxaca who made tamales on weekends, taught me where to find cheap Mexican ingredients. Elena, a Honduran woman who cleaned houses, gave me used clothes that her employers threw away. Jose, a Nicaraguan who worked in a restaurant, sometimes brought me leftover food that saved me from going hungry at night. I learned to get around the city using public transportation, memorizing routes and schedules as if my life depended on it. Because it really did. Every dollar saved on transportation was another dollar I could send home or save for emergencies. My English improved out of sheer necessity to communicate better at work. I began to understand more complex instructions, ask basic questions, and defend my work when someone criticized me unfairly. I work hard. I learn fast. Give me a chance became my battle cries. The foreman began to notice my effort and consistency. "You know how to work, Julian," he said to me one day after I finished a difficult task ahead of schedule. "I'm going to talk to my brother, who has another construction site. He needs good people like you." That recommendation changed my work situation. At the new job, I earned $120 a day, enough to start sending small amounts of money home and improve my living conditions a little. The first time I was able to send money to Paula. $200 after 2 months without sending anything. It was like breathing after drowning. Her voice when she received the money transfer was a mixture of relief and forgiveness that made me cry silently. I knew something had happened, she told me. But I also knew you weren't going to abandon us. Her faith in me, despite my lies, despite the months without money, gave me the strength to keep going. The kids want to talk to you, she said. And for the first time in months, I heard the voices of Emiliano and Fatima without the weight of guilt crushing my chest. Dad, when are you coming? Emiliano asked me. And this time I was able to respond with some hope. Soon, son, I'm working so we can have a better life. My life began to take on a more stable structure. I got up at 5 in the morning, ate a quick but nutritious breakfast, and took 2 buses to get to work by 7. During the day, I focused on doing my job as best I could, learning new skills and earning the trust of my supervisors. Evenings became structured routines, washing clothes at the community laundry with the persistent hum of the machines, preparing simple meals, canned beans, white rice, tortillas that sometimes smelled of nostalgia, in the small kitchen filled with echoes of other accents, other stories. Every night I called Paula and the kids. Sometimes their voices sounded distant, other times full of strength and love, like an invisible thread that tied me tightly to the life I missed so much. On nights when I felt up to it, I wrote letters by hand, pouring out everything I couldn't say on the phone, fears, regrets, dreams. And although I never sent most of them, those words saved me from sadness many times. Time passed. And although my English improved and my body grew stronger, the loneliness did not disappear. Sometimes, in the dim light of my rented room, the memory of Luis and his betrayal burned like salt on a wound I could barely touch. There were nights when I thought my heart would break in the absence, in the routine of surviving without family hugs, without the laughter of my children when they woke up. 2 years later, exhaustion and emptiness took their toll. Work was getting harder, the little money I had was harder to come by, and my calls with Paula were shorter, filled with silence and worry. I found out through acquaintances that Luis had rebuilt his life far away, with another family, without ever thinking of returning or explaining his betrayal to me. That news devastated me for days, awakening resentment and more loneliness. I thought about giving up, even staying there forever, resigned to the silence that bitterness leaves behind. But then I remembered why I had fought. It wasn't for the American dream or a bank account, but for my children's eyes and Paula's smile. I promised myself I wouldn't let hatred become my baggage, but rather love and learning, even if it cost me my soul. One day, when I felt that there was no point in staying away any longer, I decided to return. I sold what little I had, packed my memories and scars, and crossed the border in the opposite direction, trembling with fear and new hope. The reunion in Puebla was a mixture of tears, laughter, and silences filled with things left unsaid. Paula hugged me like the first time, and the children, now older, ran toward me as if my absence had never existed. I told them the truth little by little, the betrayal, the loneliness, my mistakes, and my infinite desire to start over. It wasn't easy, but here we are. I found honest work, watched my children grow up, and learned that a home is not measured by the size of the house, but by the warmth of the glances under the same roof. Today I know that betrayal by those you love most can break you. but it should never define you. I learned not to put my life and the lives of my loved ones in the hands of others, even if they are your soul brothers. I learned that sacrifice is only worth it if you come back, if you don't lose your heart along the way, if you learn to ask for help and to forgive. To all those who hear my story, I say, emigrate if you so choose, armed with courage, knowing that life can be broken and put back together 1,000 times, that sometimes friends leave you alone, but family, well cared for, heals even the deepest wounds. Hold on to your roots, do everything with honesty, and don't hide your mistakes. They are what teach you the true value of coming back. Take care of your family, never lose touch. Don't let pride drown you. When life knocks you down, remind yourself why you fought and why you must return. If my story touched you, share yours below. May this corner serve as a refuge for those who continue to struggle against distance, broken promises, and the ever-present hope of returning home. Subscribe, comment. Don't let your voice be lost in silence. Thank you for listening. This story no longer weighs me down. Now it helps me to move forward and embrace every day my true treasure, my family.